1927, Turkey. Every photograph showed a different number of children. The Izmir Manifest. The year was 1927. Izmir was alive with noise, a city rebuilt after fire, carrying the scent of salt from the sea and smoke from the past. But in one photograph, just one ordinary photograph, something strange lingered. A group of children stood together, smiling, the kind of smile that only hides silence. No one noticed then? Not yet. When a photograph was shown weeks later, a detail emerged. The number of children was wrong. Some swore there had been 7. Others counted 8. The photograph itself seemed to shift. What should have been a harmless picture began to whisper of something dark, something unsaid. At first, people laughed. It's just the angle, they said. A child hidden behind another, a shadow, a trick of the light. But the more the photographs appeared, the harder it became to explain. Every time a new picture was developed, the number of children changed. One day 6, another day 9, and always faces that no one remembered. It wasn't only the number. Sometimes a boy stood where there had been no boy. Sometimes a girl in a ribbon appeared, then disappeared. They seemed to fade in and out of existence, caught between the lens and the truth. Neighbors began to whisper, "Who are these children? Why did their faces not match the names in the school registers? And why did the teachers refuse to answer questions?" The photographer himself, a man named Izmir, claimed he didn't notice at first. "The camera never lies," he muttered. But at night, he confessed something else. The negatives were changing. Even the plates themselves bore different children, as if the city's lost souls were forcing themselves into his work. One evening, he tried to burn a faulty photograph. The fire roared, the paper curled, but the image would not vanish. When the ashes cooled, the children were still there, faint but unbroken, their eyes darker than before. Izmir locked his studio and drank heavily, but the photographs would not stop. Every week another group portrait, another impossible count. And then the first mother came forward. She said one of the children in the photograph was her son, but her son had died in the fire of 1922 years earlier. She recognized his hair, his eyes, his crooked smile. "He is there," she whispered, pointing at the photo, "but he should not be." Others came too. Fathers who swore their daughters had been lost in the chaos of war. Families who had no graves to visit, but suddenly saw their children reappear in prints sold on the street. A haunting spread across Izmir. Every picture was a reminder of those who were gone, or perhaps never truly gone. Rumors spread fast. Some believed the children were ghosts of the fire, wandering souls demanding recognition. Others said the orphanages were hiding secrets, using the photographs to mask disappearances. A few muttered of darker things, that the children were not children at all, but echoes of something ancient, drawn into the fragile glass of Izmir's lens. And through it all, one truth remained. Every photograph of that group never stayed the same. No matter who counted, no matter who looked, the number of children was never certain. The city began to call it by name, the Izmir Manifest, and it was only the beginning. The city of Izmir was never truly silent. Markets roared with traders, seagulls circled above the harbor, and narrow alleyways carried the smell of bread, sweat, and damp stone. But in 1927, a different kind of murmur began to spread, a murmur that traveled faster than any merchant's call. It was the whispers of children, children who were seen one day and gone the next. At first, it seemed like gossip. A boy playing marbles in the courtyard, one afternoon, vanished by morning. A girl in a red ribbon walked home from school and was never seen again. Some claimed they had never existed at all. Yet others swore they had spoken to them, touched them, even heard their laughter echo through the streets at dusk. It became a city-wide unease. Women carrying baskets of figs lowered their voices. Men drinking coffee turned pale at the mention. Everyone knew someone who had seen a child appear where none had been before. Sometimes entire groups of children wandered through the bazaar, their faces half familiar, their eyes strange. The stories all carried the same detail. They never lingered. By the time someone gathered courage to approach, the children were gone. No footprints in the dust. No names to give. Only silence where their voices had been. One shopkeeper swore he saw the same boy 3 times in a week. Each time the boy wore the same patched coat. Each time he carried a wooden spinning top. But the boy grew older in each sighting, as if days or even years had passed between appearances. By the 3rd time, the shopkeeper swore he saw stubble on the boy's chin. When he blinked, the figure was gone. A fisherman's wife told of hearing children's songs outside her window at night. Old rhymes sung off-key, drifting through the salt air. But when she looked, the street was empty, the shadows unmoving. The song stopped only when she lit a candle, as if the flame pushed them back into the dark. Fear grew heavy in Izmir. People spoke of the fire of 1922, when thousands of children were lost in smoke and chaos. Were these the same children? Had the flames never released them? Or were they being hidden, shuffled through the city by hands that profited from silence? Some pointed to the orphanages. Their doors were closed too tightly. Their ledgers were missing pages. The numbers of children admitted never seemed to match the numbers that left. Yet the priests and caretakers spoke little. They only urged the townspeople not to dwell on phantoms of grief. But grief does not stay buried. Grief bleeds into photographs. It seeps into the cracks of a city. It lingers in the spaces where children should be laughing but aren't. By summer, the whispers had taken a sharper turn. The people of Izmir began calling them the fading ones, the children who came and went, the ones who never stayed. And each time a new photograph surfaced, more faces appeared, faces no one could place, faces no one dared to forget. The city was holding its breath. Something was coming, something the whispers could no longer hide. Simul's studio was a place of light and shadows. He was known as the man who captured weddings, baptisms, and parades. His camera was his livelihood, his pride. But by late 1927, his once busy shop had turned into a haunted chamber, its walls lined with photographs he no longer dared to show. At night, he drank alone under the dim glow of an oil lamp. He stared at the photographs stacked on his desk, hands trembling as he flipped through them. Each one carried the same sickness. Faces he didn't recognize. Children who hadn't been there. Numbers that never stayed the same. For weeks, Simul told no one. He feared people would call him mad, or worse, accuse him of trickery. But the evidence was impossible to deny. His negatives, the fragile glass plates themselves, were changing. He would lock them away, certain of what they showed. Days later, when he checked again, they bore different figures. Once, he left a negative of 7 children beside his bed. When he woke, there were 9, and one of the new faces was smiling directly at him, as if it knew what he had seen. Simul began to hear things in the darkroom. The faint patter of feet, the whisper of children's voices, the click of his camera shutter, though he hadn't touched it. He told himself it was exhaustion. He told himself it was drink. But then the shadows began to move. One night, as he poured developer across a plate, a reflection shimmered in the chemical bath. He saw himself, but behind him, dozens of children crowded the room, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. He spun around. The room was empty. When he looked back at the tray, the reflection had vanished. Only his face remained, pale and broken. The guilt began to consume him. He told his wife, in a whisper, that the photographs were lies, that his camera had become a trap, a window for things that shouldn't exist. His wife, terrified, begged him to stop, burn the plates, smash the camera. But Simul could not. "It doesn't matter what I do," he muttered. "They come back. They always come back." The city began to notice his decline. His eyes sank deep into his skull. His hands shook when he tried to take portraits. Customers stopped coming, frightened by his strange mutterings and haunted expression. Children passed his shop and swore they saw other faces peering from the windows, faces that melted away when adults looked. Finally, Simul made a desperate choice. He invited the local priest to his studio, showing him the photographs one by one. The priest grew pale, but said little. When Simul begged him for help, the priest whispered, "These are not lies. They are reminders. The city is full of children we try to forget." Simul's confession spread through Izmir like fire. People now avoided his studio, calling it cursed. Yet the photographs continued to appear, sometimes left on doorsteps, sometimes found nailed to wooden posts in the bazaar. No one admitted placing them. No one dared throw them away. And Seymour himself? He disappeared one winter night, leaving his studio door unlocked, the camera still standing on its tripod. On the desk lay a final photograph. It showed a group of children, their faces sharper, clearer than ever before. And among them, standing in the back, was Seymour, smiling. The whispers had reached the homes. It was no longer only Seymour's cursed photographs or the faint songs at night. It was mothers seeing faces they could not name. It was fathers hearing laughter from empty courtyards. Families who had lost children in fire, famine, or flight now faced something far more cruel: the return of the forgotten. One morning, a woman named Layla saw her daughter's image staring back from a photograph in the market. The child wore the same ribbon she had buried with her 5 years earlier. Layla fainted in the street. When she awoke, she swore it was her daughter. But her husband pulled her close and whispered harshly, "No, you must not say her name again." The city was learning a bitter truth. Some mothers denied what they saw, clinging to silence as protection. Some fathers erased names from memory, convincing themselves they had never had such children at all. It was safer to forget, but forgetting leaves scars. Neighbors began to notice gaps in stories. Families who once had 4 children now spoke of only 2. Whole branches of family trees were clipped away, cut off at the root. The children who appeared in photographs and alleys were ghosts not only of the dead, but of memory itself. A tailor admitted one evening, drunk with raki, that he had given his son to an orphanage after the war. The boy had been frail, sickly, a burden in hard times. When shown a photograph, the tailor swore the boy staring back was his. But the next morning, he denied it. He spat in the dirt and cursed those who asked. In Izmir, denial became survival. The city was rebuilding after fire, clinging to stability. No one wanted to face the truth that some had abandoned their children, sold them, or watched them vanish into hunger. To admit it was to admit guilt. So they looked away. But the photographs did not let them. A widow named Sophia was found weeping in the churchyard. She held a photograph to her chest. It showed her son, long dead in the fire, standing beside children she did not recognize. She begged the priest to take it from her, to burn it. But when he tried, the paper would not catch flame. It curled, blackened, but the boy's face remained. Others locked photographs in drawers, buried them in gardens, even threw them into the sea. Still, they found their way back. A father who tossed one into the waves discovered it nailed to his front door the next morning, soaked but unburned. And so the city split. Some clung to denial, pretending the children had never lived. Others whispered their names in the dark, keeping them alive in secret memory. But neither side could escape the same terror. The children were not staying buried. They were returning, through faces, through whispers, through every image that refused to fade. The streets of Izmir carried an invisible weight. Behind every shuttered window, guilt sat heavy at the table. And in every alley, the silence of the missing pressed against the walls. The city was haunted, not by ghosts, but by its own forgetting. The story of the photographs became more than rumor when one boy's face kept returning. His image appeared again and again, clearer each time, as though the camera wanted him remembered. He was no older than 12. Dark hair, cropped short. A crooked smile that showed one missing tooth. He always stood slightly apart from the other children, as if he did not belong. No one could name him. No one claimed him. Yet every photograph seemed to demand that someone must. In the bazaars, whispers spread of the vanishing boy. Merchants swore they saw him walking between stalls, slipping through crowds. Children said they had played marbles with him, only to watch him fade like smoke before the last stone was thrown. A fisherman even claimed he shared bread with the boy by the pier, until the boy asked a question that chilled him. "Do you remember me?" The fisherman blinked. The boy was gone. An archivist at the school tried to trace him. She combed through old registers, searching for boys with the same features. The records were broken, pages missing. But one name appeared, written in faded ink, then scratched out with a heavy hand. Adam, no surname, no family, only a date of admission to an orphanage, then silence. The lines after his name were blank, as if history had swallowed him whole. The orphanage itself gave no answers. Its gates were closed, its walls too high. The caretaker denied any knowledge of a boy named Adam. "We never had him," he insisted. But when the archivist pressed harder, the man grew pale. He whispered, almost to himself, he wasn't supposed to exist. That night, the archivist found a photograph slipped under her door. It showed the boy again. This time he was alone, standing in the middle of a deserted street. His eyes were fixed on her, unblinking, as though waiting for her to speak his name. The city began to fear him. Children dared one another to call his name at night, but none dared twice. Adults avoided the subject altogether. Seymour's old photographs that bore his face were hidden, traded in secret, passed like cursed relics. Still, the boy returned. Always the same crooked smile. Always the same missing tooth. A shadow carved into memory. Some believed he was the spirit of every lost child condensed into one. Others said he was real once, but erased deliberately, his life wiped away by hands that profited from forgetting. But one thing was certain: the vanishing boy refused to stay erased. His name, though scratched out of history, lived again in whispers, in shadows, in photographs that would not die. And each time his face reappeared, the air in Izmir grew heavier, as if he was coming closer, as if one day he would no longer vanish. The children were vanishing, the photographs were multiplying, and still, the city's leaders said nothing. Schools went on as though nothing was amiss. Churches rang their bells on Sundays, their sermons speaking only of sin and salvation, never of the missing. The silence was deafening. Teachers saw empty seats in their classrooms. They marked absences in ledgers that were never spoken of again. When parents asked, the teachers would shrug. The family moved away, they'd say, or he was never on my list. But the parents knew. The seats stayed empty. The air around them was heavy, as if the children still lingered. One teacher, a frail man named Yusuf, began to falter under the weight of his silence. His students noticed the way his chalk shook against the board, the way he avoided the far corner of the classroom. For there, in the corner, sat a boy no one else could see. Yusuf never called his name, but his eyes always drifted toward him. Late one night, Yusuf confessed to a fellow teacher, "I see them. All of them. Every lesson, every prayer." They sit where they sat before, waiting. By morning, Yusuf was gone. His classroom was locked, his belongings scattered. On his desk lay a single photograph. It showed his class, every child accounted for. But in the back row, shadowed, yet visible, sat children who were never enrolled. The priests were no different. They preached of God's mercy, but closed their doors when grieving mothers begged for answers. Some claimed the children were angels, visiting briefly before ascending. Others warned that they were demons, testing faith. But in secret, some priests knew more than they admitted. One was found scribbling furiously in a private journal. "They follow me from the altar to the sacristy. Their voices rise when I kneel. They are not gone. They accuse me with their silence." When the journal was discovered, the priest had already fled Izmir. His robes were left behind, folded neatly, as if to erase his place in the church. Silence became its own kind of crime. Teachers who refused to speak. Priests who looked away. Officials who erased names. Their refusal to acknowledge the children gave the haunting more strength, more weight. The people of Izmir began to wonder, who benefited from this silence? Why did those in power prefer denial over truth? It was as if the city itself was conspiring to bury its children twice, once in life and again in memory. And yet, the children refused burial. Their eyes stared from photographs. Their voices whispered in empty classrooms. Their shadows lingered in the aisles of churches. They were silent witnesses no longer. The guilt of those who looked away was becoming unbearable, and someone would soon force them to speak. The orphanages of Izmir were meant to be places of safety, But by 1927, they had become places of suspicion. Behind the high walls and locked gates, the city's forgotten children were hidden away. Some arrived after losing their parents in war or fire. Others were brought by desperate families who could no longer feed them. But no one truly knew how many children entered, or how many ever left. The truth began to unravel through a book, a ledger that should have been ordinary, but was not. It was discovered by a young clerk named Emin, tasked with sorting through church records. The orphanage ledger was thick, its pages stained with ink and fingerprints. At first glance, it seemed simple, columns of names, ages, dates of admission. But as Emin traced the lines, she noticed something unsettling. The numbers never matched. 32 children admitted in 1 month, but only 28 recorded the next. Rows of names crossed out, some without explanation. Entire pages missing, torn carefully from the spine. The book did not tell a story of care. It told a story of erasure. Emin carried the ledger to her superior, trembling. "These records, they don't make sense," she whispered. But the priest barely looked at it. He closed the book with a heavy hand and warned her, "Do not trouble yourself with ghosts." Yet the images would not leave her mind. When she returned home, she dreamed of the children whose names had been scratched out. She saw them standing at the foot of her bed, silent, waiting. The next morning, she reopened the ledger. To her horror, new names had appeared, written in a hand not her own. Some belonged to children she remembered seeing on the streets. Others were unfamiliar. And next to them, faintly penciled in, were words she could barely read, gone without trace. Word of the ledger spread quietly. Parents whispered about children who had been sent to the orphanage, never to be heard from again. Some claimed their sons and daughters had been sold, taken across seas, their names erased from the record to cover the crime. Others feared something darker, that the children had not left at all, but remained inside the walls, buried in silence. One night, Emin's home was broken into. The ledger was stolen, torn from her desk. She never saw it again, but the damage was done. Copies of pages had already been shared in secret, and the truth had already begun to fester. The orphanages were no longer seen as havens. They became symbols of fear. Every creak of their gates, every candle flickering behind barred windows, reminded the city of the children who entered but never returned. And yet, despite the missing pages, despite the stolen book, one thing remained etched in memory. The numbers never matched. And in Izmir, everyone knew what that meant. By autumn of 1927, the city itself seemed to carry the presence of the children. The air in Izmir grew heavy, the kind of heaviness that pressed down on chests and made breathing uneasy. Streets that had once bustled with merchants and sailors now felt uneasy after dusk. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long. Every echo seemed to belong to a child who was not there. People began to avoid certain places. The charred ruins near the harbor, where laughter was sometimes heard at midnight. The old schoolhouse, where chalk scraped faintly across the board even when the room was empty. The stone alleys, where passers-by swore they saw little hands reaching out from the cracks. The city was alive with children, but not in the way it should have been. Merchants claimed their stalls were being disturbed at night. Toys were found displaced, figs scattered as if by tiny hands. A fisherman said he saw small figures running across the pier, but when he chased them, the boards were empty. Mothers swore they felt tugging at their skirts in the market, only to turn and find no one there. The haunting was not violent. It was worse. It was familiar. The children who returned did not scream or threaten. They simply lingered, watching, waiting, as if asking to be remembered. The city could not ignore them anymore. Conversations in tea houses turned darker. Men who once dismissed the photographs now spoke of them in low, trembling voices. Women avoided looking at family portraits, afraid of what new faces might appear in the frames. Even the children who remained alive were uneasy, whispering that their playmates were not all from the living. Some began leaving offerings at street corners, bread, milk, small wooden toys, hoping to appease the unseen. Candles were lit in windows, Prayers whispered into the night. Yet the haunting only grew stronger, as if acknowledgement gave it strength. A turning point came when the church bell rang one stormy night, though no hand had pulled the rope. When the townspeople gathered, they found the church filled with photographs pinned to the pews, each showing different groups of children. Some were local faces, others were strangers. The silence in that moment was unbearable. "They belong to us," someone whispered. "This city is theirs." The people of Izmir began to understand. This was not only a haunting, it was an accusation. The children were not gone. They were present in every stone, every shadow, every shuttered window. The city had tried to forget them, and for that, the city itself had become their graveyard. Izmir was haunted, not by foreign invaders, not by fire or war, but by its own children. The ones it had lost, the ones it had hidden, the ones it had erased. And the haunting was far from over. By winter, the photographs had grown unbearable. They no longer appeared only in markets or pinned to church pews. They surfaced in homes, slid under doors, tucked inside prayer books. No one admitted delivering them, yet every family had one. The most terrifying were the last images taken from Seymour's abandoned studio. Hidden in a wooden box, wrapped in cloth, they were discovered by a neighbor after weeks of silence. Inside lay his final roll of film. When developed, the pictures revealed something no one could explain. The first frame showed a group of children in a cobblestone alley. But the alley itself no longer existed. It had been destroyed in the fire years earlier. The children's faces were sharp, yet their eyes were unfocused, as though staring past the viewer. The second frame revealed the old schoolhouse. The classroom was filled, every seat occupied. But many of the children sitting at the desks had been declared dead long ago. Some wore outdated clothes. Some bore scars from fire. Others looked impossibly whole, as though time had reversed itself. But the third frame was the one that silenced even the boldest men in Izmir. It showed a large hall, dark and crumbling, with rows of children stretching into the shadows. Hundreds of them, faces familiar and unfamiliar, some smiling, some expressionless. At the center of the group stood the vanishing boy. His crooked smile was sharper than ever. His missing tooth seemed almost deliberate, like a signature. And behind him, blurred yet undeniable, was Seymour. He was holding the camera. The photographs were passed in secret, studied in candlelight. Some claimed they saw their own children among the faces. Others swore they recognized children who had never been born. Each person saw something different, yet all agreed on one truth. The film carried more than images. It carried presence. Those who kept the photographs reported strange events. Small footsteps pacing at night. Toys moving from shelf to floor. The sound of weeping in corners. One man awoke to find his dead sister's doll sitting at his bedside, its porcelain face cracked, its eyes fixed on him. Authorities tried to seize the roll of film, declaring it dangerous, but spread too quickly. Copies were made, traded in whispers, smuggled out of the city. By the time officials moved in, the original negatives had vanished, leaving only fragments of proof. Yet no one could forget what they had seen, the faces that should not exist. The children who returned not in flesh, but in image. The city of Izmir began to realize that photographs were no longer just memories. They had become doors. Doors the children were walking through, again and again, until someone finally listened. And now the question pressed heavier than ever. What did they want? By the dawn of 1928, the whispers had hardened into something undeniable. What began as scattered rumors, as shadows and photographs, had grown into a single, unbearable truth. Izmir was a city standing on the bones of its own forgotten children. And in the heart of that truth lay what people began calling the Izmir Manifest. No one agreed on what the manifest truly was. Some said it was a list, an unburned ledger that survived the fire, containing the names of all the children who vanished. Others whispered it was not a document at all, but a curse, a living record that wrote itself into photographs, into dreams, into memory. But one detail remained constant. It was never meant to be found. In a hidden archive beneath the city hall, a clerk claimed to have discovered a charred book. Its pages were warped by flame, yet fragments of names could still be read. Some bore crosses beside them, as if marked for death. Others were violently scratched out. Between the lines, faint imprints of children's faces lingered, pressed into the paper as though they had leaned against it. The clerk disappeared days later. All that remained was his note. The manifest grows each night. I fear I am already part of it. Others said the manifest was spoken, not written. A secret oath shared by priests, teachers, and officials. A vow of silence to erase the children from history. If so, it was a vow that bound the city in chains of guilt. A silence so deep it became louder than words. And yet, the children refused silence. Their laughter echoed in alleys. Their faces multiplied in frames. Their presence turned every locked drawer, every missing page, into evidence of a crime the city could not bury. By spring, families began leaving Izmir altogether. They said the city was cursed, poisoned by the weight of its forgotten. Houses stood empty, shutters banging in the sea wind. The markets thinned, streets grew hollow. But still, the children remained. Their shadows moved behind broken windows. Their songs drifted in the salt air. It was as if the manifest had grown larger than paper, larger than secrets. It had become the city itself. Some believe the manifest still exists, hidden somewhere among charred ruins or sealed within church vaults. Others believe it never needed to exist on paper, that the true record was always in the guilt of those who lived and in the relentless return of those who were lost. And perhaps that is the most terrifying truth of all, that a city can bury its children in ash, that it can deny their names, erase their faces, but it can never truly silence them. The Izmir Manifest was not written by hands. It was written by the children themselves, etched into memory, burned into photographs, whispered into every street until the city itself confessed. And though nearly a century has passed, some say the photographs still surface, that the children of Izmir still gather in frames and in shadows, waiting for someone, anyone, to finally see them, not as ghosts, not as phantoms, but as the names that history tried to erase.